Today, on episode number 531 of the Teaching in Higher Ed podcast, a podcast I had a very hard time naming because I feel like I can't do this topic justice, Multimedia Magic, integrating IIIF into your teaching toolkit, with Christopher Gilman and Adelmar Ramirez.
Produced by Innovate Learning, maximizing human potential.
Welcome to this episode of Teaching in Higher Ed. I'm Bonnie Stahoviak, and this is the space where we explore the art and science of being more effective at facilitating learning. We also share ways to improve our productivity approaches so we can have more peace in our lives and be even more present for our students. Oh, today we are in for such a treat with today's guests and the topic that they are bringing. First off, Christopher Gilman is the Digital Curriculum Program Coordinator at the University of California, Los Angeles Library. He supports student and faculty engagement with digital collections, as you'll hear about in this interview, and oversees instructional design in the digital library program, promoting innovation through the Canvas learning management system and integrated tools and platforms. Chris is a founding co-director of the IIIF, International Image Interoperability Framework Community Group for Education, and works with collaborators worldwide on systems and practices for integrating digital collections and IIIF-compatible technologies into instruction. Dr. Gilman has a PhD in Slavic languages and literatures and has worked in comparable roles in K-12, liberal arts, and R1 institutions. Also joining me today is Adelmar Ramirez. He has a bachelor's in psychology and a master's in creative writing from the University of Texas at El Paso. He also holds a PhD in Hispanic languages and literature from the University of California, Los Angeles. And we're going to hear more about Adelmar's background as we listen to this episode. Christopher Gilman and Adelmar Ramirez, welcome to Teaching in Higher Ed.
Thank you.
Christopher Gilman is the Digital Curriculum Program Coordinator at the UCL Library. He supports student and faculty engagement with digital collections and oversees instructional design in the digital library program, promoting innovation through the Canvas learning management system and integrated tools and platform. And Christopher, before we hear more about Adelmar as our means of introduction, I'd love to have you introduce us to the International Image Operability Framework briefly and talk about your interest in it.
So the first thing that anybody needs to know about the International Image Interoperability Framework is that it goes by IIIF. And this is an acronym. It can sound very technical, and some people are reasonably acronym averse. But
Sure.
IIIF is an acronym. It implies many things. It has many connotations. And it's also an icon. It's cute. It has three little eyes that are blue and red, and it does things if you click on it. So believe me, it's worth knowing and worth sort of accepting, among other things, as IIIF. I think if there's really one thing to take away about IIIF, it is that the world's special collections and archives and museum vaults are suddenly opened up for all of us. And they're great for scholars and people who are used to going in and out of those doors and carefully protected rooms and so forth. But we can all use it. And it's not the easiest thing to find. But once you get a taste for it, once you have zoomed in and out and looked at high-resolution imagery of an illuminated manuscript or a Cuban cinema poster or something like that, then you get used to how exciting, how valuable these things can be. And the work that we've essentially been doing is to bring this into the classroom in as easy a way as possible so that first year students coming into college get welcomed into those very rarefied spheres right away. It's super exciting.
I already, and of course I was curious from the moment of the first email, but I'm so curious, but I don't want to neglect, of course, Adelmar, you're the first person of your partnership here, your collaboration, who contacted me. And I'm so excited for us to just learn a little bit about you. So Adelmar Ramirez has a bachelor's in psychology and a master's degree in creative writing from the University of Texas at El Paso. He holds a PhD in Hispanic languages and literature from the University of California, Los Angeles. And this is where you take over and tell us more about some of your work, some of your writing, some of your research. And buckle up, everybody, because you're about to, if what Chris said intrigued you, I suspect you're about to be even more intrigued.
Oh, thank you. Well, I teach Spanish and Latin American literature at Food College. And on the side, I like to write poetry. I have published 2 books, one called Fuera de Temporada, or Out of Season, and the other one, Presta Nombres, or Frontman. And I think that poetry, I have a perfect application of a IIIF in the classroom that combines also poetry. I don't know if you've heard of Dadaist poetry. It started in France, and it's very simple. And actually, not long ago, you in this podcast, you were talking about micro lectures. And so I found a video of Tristan Tzara, who's a French poet, who explains in 30 seconds the instructions of how to create this poem. And it's very simple. You take a newspaper, a pair of scissors, you choose an article, you cut the article, cut the words, put them in a bag, shake them gently, and pull the words as they are in order. You write and copy copiously, and that's your poem. And so I included this micro lecture in Canvas, and then I have the step-by-step process of how to create a poem like this, and then using a IIIF cropping tool, which is just a tool for cutting these words from a newspaper. Thankfully, the UCLA Digital Library has a collection of newspapers digitalized. And so students can look at these papers, zoom in, basically cut these words with this tool, and then create their poem. And after they create the poem, this is where annotation gets social. They react to each other's poems, what they liked about it, what they would like to see in a further poem. And so I think that in this way, I also saw in other of your podcasts that there was the idea of flipping the classroom, right? So taking the idea of changing lecture in person to online activities. And I think that IIIF can be a cohesive tool for micro lectures, for lab activities, for social annotation, and have all of that working organically in the classroom. And I think that our responsibility as professors in the 21st century is to engage students more. And I think that when we share with students the affordances of IIIF, they engage. Poetry is always a topic that students are reluctant to read because it's difficult to understand the intentions of the author. But when it gets hands-on, when it gets playful, I think that they enjoy it the most.
Earlier, Chris, you mentioned about the ways, and the phrase that you used was the world's image collections are suddenly opened up for all of us. 2 things come to mind when you say that. One is more inclusivity and equity in our teaching. A second thing that came up for me just had to do with access, which of course these things are so interwoven with each other. I just went and celebrated a dear friend's graduation. He just finished his PhD. His research, his name's, by the way, Dr. That feels good to say. Dr. Stephen Moore just finished his PhD in history from the University of California, Riverside. And here's where I'm going to get really clumsy. And if Stephen ever listens to this, my deepest apologies. His dissertation is in something around folk music and history, and I'm not doing it justice, but it was a long time in coming, just like so many of our doctoral journeys can be. One of the reasons it was a long time in coming, and here's where I'm also going to be clumsy and sure have my facts not quite straight, but there was this global pandemic that prevented him from being able to travel to some of the sites where the folk music archives were stored. So I would love to have both of you spend a few minutes expanding our imagination in two ways. I need help because I have, for the most part, taught at smaller institutions that could we can't even sometimes, I should speak for myself. I can't even imagine some of the things that exist out there in the world. It feels almost too good to be true. So rather than, I think some of us get bogged down with technologically, how would we do this? And for me, so much of my thinking and my work is, that's not often the problem. We think it's the problem, and that holds us back. But the actual problem is having our imaginations expanded. So I'd love to have both of you share whatever comes to mind for just how incredible it is, what is available to anyone and everyone. You don't have to have special keys to get in the door. You don't have to have the money or the wherewithal to be able to travel to these different places and have access to get inside. Chris, you said to get inside those rooms. So a few examples from each of you would be helpful of like, did you know that this repository exists of this kind of a thing, just to help expand our imagination. And then on the second piece, related piece to that, helping expand our imagination around just the ways in which once you know that you don't have to have the magical keys to get in there, what can you do with this stuff? And you both already started to do it. I mean, but let's just continue on that vein. So what are some amazing things that are out there that some of us might have no idea is available to any of us? We don't have to have this special credentials. And then once we realize that, what are some cool things we could do with this stuff?
So first, I'd like to say thank you for appreciating the long dissertation slog. If it weren't for my very late stage experience trying to finish up a PhD, I never would have gotten into this business in the first place. This is roughly 25 years ago at USC. I'm a Slavist by training, so I have a PhD in Slavic languages and literatures. But sort of as a keep you on board gesture, my professor offered me a TA-ship in a general education course on Russian thought and civilization. And that was the first time I realized, so our job in the course was to integrate multimedia into the course to look at things like Russian icons and old publications and maps and other kinds of things relevant to this very broad topic. And it was the first time that I saw that a subject as arcane as Russian thought and civilization is actually approachable if you emphasize visuality as opposed to language. And many students are intimidated by the language barrier, by Cyrillic and other kinds of things, but the visual culture and material culture were extraordinarily rich. And that has led to essentially this 25-year career doing the same thing, trying to get multimedia, that is visual imagery, other kinds of things, integrated into mainstream curriculum. Just a little bit about IIIF, so as not to get in the weeds about it technically, but there is a key term in it, which is interoperability. And that is the set of agreements or standards by which institutions around the world offer their image-based content. That means that if you access linked content from the Cambridge University Library, the Getty, Harvard, Library of Congress, our own UCLA, or other kinds, you can work on them together. And if you learn a few tricks, like some that Adelmar just mentioned about, for example, effectively cropping images or sharing them, then you can do it with any of that content, and you can mix and match it together. You can do comparative studies. You can do it at the highest possible level of scholarly inquiry, or you can just have fun with it. You can make ransom letters out of bits and pieces cut from newspapers and manuscripts. So it's a ton of fun. It's very exciting. And I guess I would emphasize maybe one more thing that Adelmar mentioned, which is hands-on. This is very much thinking with your hands. Every step that you make, every button that you click is an operation. It's not inherently digital. It is the same kinds of things that you might do if you were allowed with a pair of scissors to go into an archive and cut out an illumination from a manuscript and stick it in don't recommend this, but this is what happened. This is where IIIF came from. It was that people cut and paste and share and sell and resell and so forth. So the hands-on is kind of fundamentally central to all of it.
Adelmar, what's coming to mind for you?
Yes, I wanted to mention that I also teach in a very small college. It's 2,000 students in Maryland. And one of the reactions of one of my students was first of kind of incredulity of thinking I have access to the collection of Harvard, Princeton, Cambridge, Oxford, UCLA, the Getty Museum, the Huntington Museum. So all of these collections are available for free. And I think that in a time where competition in the market is high, I think that having the web skills, writing for web design, creating these transferable skills like annotation, students, besides the content of the course, they have these transferable skills that they can apply then to other courses. I wanted, you mentioned about which collections are most intriguing to us. For me, there's many, but one is the Florentine Codex, and Chris can talk more in depth about the weeds of the project. What I like and what I love about that collection is that, I don't know if you knew, but when the Spaniards arrived to Mexico, they found these codices or codex, and they burned them all because they thought they were of false gods, and they didn't know that besides talking about gods, they were the basis of calendars. They had philosophies, and most of that information from the Aztec Empire, the Mexica, it was depleted. We don't have access to that anymore. But the good thing is that the Florentine Codex, which is from the 16th century, it was digitalized, I think, in part by UCLA and the Getty Museum. And it's for free. It's in the Getty Museum website. And what I love about it is that because it has capabilities, you can zoom into the engravings of the page, which was not actually a page, maybe bark or a cactus fiber. But side by side, you can also have a transcription in Spanish and English, because you can do some zooming to certain words. It has been transcribed all 12 books of the Codex, so we can see at least that surviving piece of history thanks to this amazing technology. And the immediate application for the classroom, I think the Getty Museum, besides creating this digitalized copy of the Codex, they also are thinking about some activities especially for the K-12 programs, but also I think that some of them can be easily applied in transcription or translation programs in university.
The other day, and this may have been unwise, but the other day, I hardly ever do this, but I believe it was the Washington Post had a feature where you could put your birth date in, and it would show you what was on the headlines of the newspaper on the Washington Post. And so I did it. I didn't know if it was wise for privacy reasons. That's probably obvious to you, but I fell victim to I would be kind of intrigued. And as you were describing earlier, I was very intrigued by the newspaper headlines. And I'm also, of course, intrigued by my continued work to want to guide, facilitate, support, empathize with our faculty who are just attempting to grapple with all the implications of the continued emergence of artificial intelligence. And I am really working as a leader, as a facilitator, to be wanting to be effective at facilitating discussions that have so much heat and so much energy, and that I would want people to feel respected and regarded for all the different perspectives you might have. So I'm right now trying to design a card sorting activity for our faculty gathering. And I'm having so much fun talking with people about it. But as you started talking about this idea of the newspaper clippings or just clippings from different things, I would like to have you just sort of walk me through. Say I want to take my imagination that you just sparked in me. I have a blog. It's on WordPress. And I might like to go and do some clipping myself of old newspaper articles. Because I'm kind of mixing my metaphors here. I apologize, but I love people who try to say nothing is new under the sun. So this is not the first time. AI did not just get invented in November of 2022. This has been happening a long time. Or people that say, oh my gosh, our devices are terrible, they're horrible, we should throw them all into the sea because they've wreaked all this havoc in terms of our attention spans. And then you see the New York Times headline from I forgot what decade it was, where they were terrified that newspapers were doing that to us. Newspapers were distracting everyone on the public transportation. So if I wanted to go gather newspaper clippings related to there's nothing new under the sun about a particular topic, and I wanted to create a collage, and then I wanted that collage to be on my WordPress. What would be some steps to do that? Like you would need to first go find a collection that has newspaper clippings, and then you'd clip them. I'm assuming, and by the way, I'll stop talking in just a second. I'm assuming I have to point back to the source. I can't just go grab a screenshot. I mean, I could, but that would be not living up to the promise of what these tools can help us do. So kind of talk me through this. Like, okay, you want to collect headings, but you still want to make use of this. How does somebody go about doing that?
So probably one of the most challenging things that the IIIF community has faced is search. So if you know that you are looking for certain kinds of things, you may or may not be able to do what people are used to doing, type in Google and hope to get that response. In order really to understand IIIF and how to use it, the first thing you need to do is browse a lot.
Mm-hmm.
The IIIF.io site has lots of lists of contributing institutions and consortium members and so forth that have online collections, digital collections. And it really helps to get lost in those first and see what you can find, and then poke around and look at some of the usual types of places. The Library of Congress, of course, has a lot of material, and different university libraries have various collections. They may or may not be available in IIIF. We should note also the Internet Archive also has recently shifted to the IIIF standard. So its content also is available for this type of clipping and sharing and pasting.
You may also go to Google, actually, and let's say that you're interested in giraffes. You can put giraffes in quotation marks and then write and in caps, and then IIIF in quotation marks. And it's going to show you some resources, maybe not all of them, but you can start there. It's an easy way to look for these materials.
You have both just pointed out, first, thank you for the technical ways we might do this. I want to stress for people, we so often think search is the answer to everything. Browsing, discoverability is actually, I'm certainly not an expert in this, but the number of times that we think what we want is search, and so many times we don't know what we're looking for. So I love this emphasis of browse, browse, browse. And so that would be a step for anyone. If you, like me, are listening, and this is an entirely new world to you, browse. That's our step. And maybe that's where we end. I mean, like, this is, if you're listening, this is all brand new. There's a whole world. The world is your oyster. Browse. Once I've browsed, then I want to start using these things, and I want to use them. If I'm understanding it right, I kind of want to use them out of context, or I want to use them in my context, but I want these things to point to each other. So now help us understand if I'm going to, that's the whole beauty of it. How am I going to use something that I found in the Library of Congress in my class, in my learning management system? And then how do they talk to each other?
So that's where you get back to that cute little IIIF icon. Typically, if a collection has IIIF under the hood, it will display that somewhere, sometimes very discreetly in the metadata or information under this item that you're looking for. If you click that button, some things might happen. It might ask you if you would like to view this in a IIIF compatible viewer, and there are several of those. Universal Viewer is one, Mirador is another. These are very widely used standard viewing platforms. Mirador is particularly good for comparative viewing. So you can look at multiple items drawn from multiple sources in the same place at the same time. Sometimes they have a drag and drop operation. Sometimes if you click on that IIIF logo, what you get is a page of what's called a manifest. It's a lot of code on a page. So don't freak out. That page might be interesting to you if you've done this before, but the basic operation is that you copy the URL for that page, and then you use that to load the content into a viewer, a cropping tool, or any other IIIF compatible device. And magically, that content will then appear. You can modify the URL by a set of really easily learned steps. You can set that I only want to look at one little portion of this, the foot on this photograph, for example. You can rotate it. You can make it black and white. You can make it bitonal, so it's just a sketch. All of these are little things that you can do if you modify that URL, and it always works because it's standardized according to this set of agreements between institutions.
So there's one final layer here. And that, I mean, my gosh, I feel like I'm, again, so grateful that you contacted me, because there's so much here that I never knew about and that I'm certain so many don't as well. The final layer, not just me using it in a particular class and being able to focus in on that foot. Oh my gosh, I can think of all the ways to use this within a particular class. But then there is the element of annotation that I may discover, I think, what other people might be saying about the foot on this image. What can you tell us about now more meta conversations that happen around some of these collections using the standard?
Well, I think that what you were talking about, the foot and the annotation, for me, I start my classes telling students that we're going to write a book together. And I see their faces of being scared. But I think that the important thing about IIIF is that it changes the way that students can perceive research. So they start with an annotation, and actually an annotation that sometimes it's a question. Maybe they don't understand why these two people are in a painting or why they're dressed like that. And so what I do is that I ask them to collect these questions and annotations, and from there they develop their final research project. So annotation, I think that at least in my field, literature is always based on close reading. And so I think that with IIIF, it changes the focus. Instead of being close reading, it becomes close viewing, and also viewing as a kind of research inquiry. And I think that for some students, I have this experience where students say, in other classes, they get an assignment. Okay, your final project, an essay of 10 pages or 20 pages, and they get to the last week and they don't know what they're going to write about. With IIIF, they know, because since week 2, they start working with this annotation, with this copying tool, and it's just a matter of putting everything together. And so it becomes a less stressful time. In finals, they know what to execute. They have acquired their skills during the semester. And so they feel like I have, in my classes, there's a lot of readings, there's a lot of activities, which could have been a very dense and stressful time. It just becomes a moment of clarity and metacognition as well, because in the end, it's not only my grade, but they also look at each other pages and evaluate themselves. They give each other feedback. So also it becomes a group activity. I don't know. I'm really in love with this. So if you're interested, I really recommend you either contacting us or just Googling for more IIIF related content.
One quick question on this. Where does this annotation live? Now, you've so much helped me be able to perceive what you're sharing, but where is this happening? Is this within the learning management system, somewhere through IIIF or some other?
So that's the $1 million question. and it gets to the heart technically and historically of what an annotation is. Historically, annotations are valuable because you can see what readers have thought about books that they've owned over the centuries, either contemporaneous with when they were written or over the time since. So it's, in a sense, an annotation is an utterance that belongs to a reader, not to an author. So the IIIF community and consortium have thought about annotation quite a bit. They use web-based standards to define what annotations are, but the real question is, where are they stored? In some cases, annotations are stored along with the original items in a repository. So at the Getty, for example, or at a library. These are annotations that are created by scholars and experts that enhance the original collections. Adelmar made reference to the Digital Florentine Codex at the Getty Research Institute. This is a digital edition with it's recently launched. It's an extraordinary example of how old material can be enhanced through contemporary scholarship, transcriptions, translations, et cetera. All of that is a kind of annotation. The other kind of annotation that we've made active use of and are very excited about is annotations that are effectively held within a learning management system. So these are password protected. They occur in the classroom environment, in this case, in Canvas, the learning management system, and the students can speak openly among themselves. Everybody is required to annotate a certain number of times. They're given guidance on what is an annotation and basic standards of plausibility. That is, you don't have to be right. You don't have to be the best annotation. It just has to fall within a range of, this is what I see, this is how I interpret it. And that sharing, it's extraordinary. It's 1,000 eyes looking at an image, and suddenly students are not only looking at the same thing at the more or less the same time, but they see and read what each other has to say about it. And we all learn from that kind of collective viewing. That annotation is kind of in a privileged environment. So the annotations can be held in various kinds of places, but underneath is one basic proficiency. It's always your observations, it's your voice, it's your interpretation, and that's what you share with other people.
This is the time in the show where we each get to share our recommendations, because I have to discipline myself, because this probably shouldn't be a 4-hour episode, even though I want it to be, because I'm so excited about all this stuff. But all right, here we go. I have 3 recommendations. The first recommendation I want to share is a piece by someone who was new to me, Adrian Cotterell. I apologize, Adrian, if I've pronounced your name wrong, in the small chance that you are listening here. A piece on his website about teacher-directed artificial intelligence. And this is part 1 of a multi-part post called Ignoring Our Ignorance. And he talks about, for those who are familiar with Daniel Kahneman's work, Daniel Kahneman's famous for having talked about System 1 thinking and System 2 thinking. And so System 1 is our fast, automatic, intuitive thinking, and System 2 is more deliberate, effortful, and requires conscious mental effort. And so this post is all about how ChatGPT is not magic. It is based on probabilities. It's a probability machine, and it's missing System 2. The System 2, again, being the deliberate, effortful, that requires mental effort and attention. And I'm going to quote him here. What we have is a cocktail of ignorance, both in the machine and in the human. So this post is just a beautiful look using some of Daniel Kahneman's work, pushing back a little bit on what artificial intelligence was designed to do, is capable of doing, versus what some of us lean into thinking that it doesn't. So my other two pieces are very, very related to each other, also from Adrian. He has a post about interaction fiction prompts, and then interaction fiction with ChatGPT, otherwise, friends, known as Choose Your Own Adventure. So I have such good memories of being a little girl and reading Choose Your Own Adventures. And I don't know if any of you can relate to this. I would try to read ahead, skip around to all the pages, and I could just picture my whole tangle of fingers in the pages of the book because I wanted to know all of the possible futures. And until I knew all the possible futures, how could I possibly know which page I wanted to turn to? So I've been intrigued by interaction fiction, but it's not something I have been very adept at doing. I know there are tools out there, open source tools that allow us to do it. But when I've gotten in there, it just feels so much, Chris, back to what you were saying earlier. I get in there and I'm instantly confronted with a coding language I don't understand. And so I get lots of self-deprecating, I'm not a coder person. So the idea of having an artificial intelligence tool to help me be able, speaking of scaffolding, to scaffold some of this, if I could get closer to success with interactive fiction or Choose Your Own Adventure, I think then I would be able to release my reliance on artificial intelligence and then be able to do more of it by hand. So I'm going to encourage anyone, if you're interested in Choose Your Own Adventure, and you want to experiment a little bit with how artificial intelligence may help you build some skills around this. This is certainly something I'm planning on doing. And what a fun couple of posts to really help scaffold our learning along this journey of how we might do this. I'm so grateful for learning about his blog, and I'm going to be in there. I'm subscribing to the RSS feed. I am so excited about continuing to learn. So, Chris, I'm going to pass it over to you for whatever you have to recommend next.
I'd like to recommend a special site in the Cambridge University Digital Library on Vesalius's Epitome, which was a short version, a condensed version that preceded his On the Fabric of the Human Body, or the Anatomy. It's a lovely site. It has the original epitome with all of the detailed illustrations of the human anatomy. They're very creepy and highly detailed, stunningly beautiful and funny in IIIF. And it also includes a video to describe what it is. It has some text, and it has a 3D scan of a particular open fold, so you can zoom in, zoom out, explore, rotate, etc. What it does is it underscores that this is not just an image, a 2D thing, or a series of images, but it's an object. It's an object of inquiry. And it's sort of a pun in that sense. Vesalius's Anatomy was really the beginning of autopsy, or seeing for oneself, and not taking somebody else's written word for it. Opening up the human body, cutting in, exploring, and using your hands as a means of learning or producing knowledge. Also, just as a nod to our UCLA Special Collections librarian, Russell Johnson, who introduced me and some colleagues, and Chenling Liu Zilioni, a professor of the history of medicine at UCLA. We have explored and found this to be sort of endlessly enchanting, and students absolutely love it. They can't believe how detailed, how accurate, or how interesting things could be that were produced that many centuries ago. But I think it gives a good summary of all the different kinds of things that are happening in the IIIF world and adjacent areas in 3D and other kinds of content that you can make directly available in your class simply by embedding it on a Canvas page in your learning management system.
I know that Adelmar also has recommendations, but I just have to tell listeners, you need to go click on this link in the show notes. And even just zooming in and zooming out, I am so zoomed in. And as you just said, I know that I'm repeating exactly what Chris just said, but I can't help it. It is blowing my mind how detailed this is. I don't even understand how this is possible. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. So, oh my gosh. So yes, everyone's going to need to go click and do some zooming in, zooming out. What a great way to get started here with this. So thank you so much, Chris. Adelmar, what do you have to recommend for us?
Sure. First, I have a book of poetry written by one of my mentors, Rosa Alcala. It's titled You. I know that with poetry, as I mentioned, there's always this hesitation to read it because it might be too complex. But this collection of poems, I gotta tell you, there's no such difficulty. It's very emotional, but also I think they're all prose poetry, so there's no enjambments or anything, and it's one of the best poetry books I ever read. And I don't say that because Rosa Alcala is my mentor. I really recommend that book. And now that I was going to recommend something else, but I wanted to change my recommendation, and I wanted to change it for a content in IIIF as well that is called The Ambassadors by Hans Holbein. And it's one of the examples that we share in our classes because it's one of the most powerful ones in my perception. Because again, it focuses on all of the details that you can pay attention to. But there's one thing about that piece is that there's in the middle, there's like a smudge. Like if you watch it in IIIF, you don't understand what it is. It just looks like smudge. But when you look at the actual physical object, it's a school. And so again, we have been talking about IIIF, like the invention of technology and what's so. But IIIF is not to say forget about physical objects. Actually, on the contrary, IIIF might help you approach physical objects and learn about physical objects under a new light. So this is not to say just focus on technology. I think this is to say technology is here to help you, as you were talking about the artificial intelligence. Again, IIIF, we have built many activities in which the whole objective is to compare how do you feel when you see a painting at a museum versus how do you approach an object in digital form. And so I'm also going to share with you the link to this painting, The Ambassadors by Hans Holbein. And I think this is also a good approach to first understand what is IIIF, because again, in abstract terms, it's difficult to imagine how does close viewing look like. So again, if you have one example, you can understand all the possibilities that you can achieve with it.
Boy, thank you so much for that last example too, because the other thing I'm finding all these connections, but so much conversation on this podcast has come up around, yes, on one hand, we want equitable teaching practices. And so if a student isn't able to visit the museum for any one of a number of reasons, does the family member become ill? Is there some other geographical constraints or something like that? But then on the other hand, faculty want to be heard and say, we are buried. We are experiencing so much trauma. We're not, you keep piling more and more things on us. It's too hard. So what you just described, the hard work has been done by other people. And so if you are going to take that trip to the museum and you wanted there to be an alternative experience for someone who wasn't able to join you, can this be some smaller steps than they might feel in your mind right now to be able to offer that to students without just burdening yourself even more with it? So what a gorgeous way to end our conversation. Thank you so much to both of you. Can we just agree this is just the start of a beautiful relationship? Can we just say that, because I don't at all feel done getting to speak with both of you. Can we do a little pinky swear that this is just the beginning? Because thank you. You've introduced me, and I'm sure to so many listeners, to an entire world that's filling my mind with possibility. Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks once again to Adelmar Ramirez and Chris Gilman for joining me on today's episode. Today's episode was produced by me, Bonnie Stachowiak. It was edited by the ever-talented Andrew Kroger. Podcast production support was provided by the amazing Sierra Priest. If you've yet to sign up for the weekly emails from Teaching in Higher Ed, I had so much fun putting together the show notes for today's episode. You're going to want to get them in your inbox so you don't have to remember to download them. Head over to teachinginhighered.com/subscribe. You'll get that weekly email in your inbox. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you next time on Teaching in Higher Ed.